Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. So this week, the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, issued new guidelines stating that transgender women should no longer be required to reduce their testosterone levels to compete in women's sports. The new framework replaces 2015 guidelines that recommended trans women suppress their testosterone levels for at least 12 months to compete. The IOC also concluded there should be no presumption that trans women have an automatic advantage. So with me to discuss this issue, I'm delighted to welcome LGBT campaigner Peter Tatchell and Debbie Hayton, a journalist, activist and physics teacher. Thank you both for joining me. So, Peter, I'm going to come to you first about this. What are your feelings about the IOC's statement this week?
Well, first let me say I am not trans, but I am a trans ally. I'm not speaking on behalf of the trans community. I'm speaking from my own perspective as a human rights campaigner. I want to see fairness for trans men and women. But I also want to see fairness for women in sport as well. And I think the IOC's decision to scrap the previous provision is partly because the science about the impact of testosterone levels is still not 100% clear. There still is some debate over that. I think also there was the very unfortunate example where two athletes from Namibia, two women athletes, biologically born women, were prohibited from running in the 400 metres at the Tokyo Olympics because they naturally had a high testosterone level. And that was very unfortunate because it's nothing in their control.
Yes, these were just biological women who had...
But to the wider issue, I think we do have to look at unfair advantage, but I would ask, why is there this focus on trans women? Because nearly all elite athletes have some kind of advantage. So if you have fast twitch muscle fibres, you can run and sprint much faster. If you've got extra large hearts and lungs, you can do better at endurance and strength events. Michael Phelps, the great Olympian swimmer, he had an exceptionally strong, enlarged lung capacity. He also had very large feet, very long arms, which gave him a clear advantage in the pool. So I'm just saying, lots of athletes have advantages. Why are we singling out trans women in particular? So
this is a very interesting point, Debbie. I want to ask you about that because inevitably, when it comes to professional athletes, their innate advantages often mean that they win more medals, and you know that happens within the categories anyway. And you're a science teacher, so is Peter right to say that there isn't really scientific evidence for the advantage that trans athletes have?
Well, there is a big advantage that male people have over female people. You know, this is well documented. And I do want to pick up on what Peter said actually about Peter apologised for not being trans. I think there's also another issue that there's three male people here talking about women's sports again.
Yeah.
Which I think is a little bit unfortunate that we are three males, three men if you like, talking about women's sports.
But you are a trans woman and you identify as trans, and so you would say, are you not a woman, therefore?
No.
Okay.
No. But I do think there is a way forward to this, which is genuinely inclusive. And it's something which the UK sports councils have mooted. And it's something which actually, I agree with what Peter was saying earlier in the week about, I think you'd said something about soccer, Peter, about having women competing in men's football. And that's not allowed under FA rules. Now, I do think there is something there about having an open category in which can be truly inclusive, where everybody can take part, but we do need to protect women's sports for biological females who haven't taken testosterone, who can compete on an equal playing field with other biological females who haven't taken testosterone.
I would just like to... I did invite some women onto the panel as well, and they could not make it. But this is an interesting point. Is that actually at the heart of this, Peter? Is it not a matter of identity? Insofar as Debbie is a trans person who you say you're biologically male, right? But a lot of trans people will say, but a trans woman is a woman. So is it just that we are all using different definitions here? Is that what's going on?
I think that's true. I mean, there's definitely something called biological sex. That is irrefutable.
Yeah.
But there's also something called gender identity. And I would say that both are valid and neither should be advantaged unless there is some compelling reason otherwise.
Yes.
When we look at trans women in sport, there are some examples where clearly they are much bigger and stronger than the biological woman they're competing against.
Yeah.
But in many instances, there's not. So I look at the women's rugby football team.
Yes.
And a lot of the women there, they are hench. They are really well built, really strong and so on, much more so than other ordinary biological women. No one's saying that they have an unfair advantage, but clearly they physically and in strength.
But they're playing within a women's category, aren't they? So
yeah, but even so, compared to other people on the team, some of them are much bigger and stronger. So you know, I think there's a lot of nuance here, and we need to be careful about generalisation. I've got a friend a trans woman who plays in a women's football team. She's actually the second smallest person on the team.
Yes.
So she has got no physiological advantage. But she gets on well. The team accept her. She's a valued part of the team. The other women in the team who are biological women, they don't have a problem with her. So what I always say is, let's not generalise. Let's look at specifics. If there's going to be exclusions, it has to be based on individual athletes where there is some clear, very demonstrable, significant advantage.
OK, so you're saying that there should be some exclusions in certain circumstances. I mean, would you say, Debbie, is there a risk? Is there a risk that if you say we're effectively saying however you identify is going to be the criteria for whether or not you are able to compete, is there a risk that this will disadvantage female athletes on a general principle?
Well, it will, and what concerns me about what Peter's saying is it's fine for trans women to compete as long as we don't win. So as long as we promise not to try our hardest and come second or third, then presumably it's OK.
Is that what you mean, Peter?
No. All I'm just saying is some trans women, many trans women, don't fit the stereotype of some big, beefy, hunked-up guy.
So it does really... It strikes me, hearing you both, it does come down to this idea of whether or not we should decide that gender identity or biological sex are the determining factors when it comes to sport. I think that's what this comes down to. And you know, do you have any thoughts on the idea of gender identity as a principle, as an idea? Well,
I don't think it exists, Andrew. You know, I really don't. I think some of us male people have got very psychological issues, which means we feel more comfortable presenting in the way that women present. But it doesn't mean that we're women. And so this, you're talking about gender dysphoria, is that what you, is that what you mean? And so that, for you, that is what being trans is. It is, you undertake certain medical procedures or as you say, presentational aspects because it makes you more comfortable and it makes you more happy. Well, I would say that I'm a male person, and I'm quite happy to say about that, but I don't think you need to have gender... I don't think you need any of these qualities to be trans. To be trans is somebody who says they're trans. And in that way, I do believe in self-identification. If I say I'm trans, I'm trans. So can I just ask, because I know a lot of people are confused about this issue, what exactly is meant by gender identity? Well, it's supposed to be an internal quality that we've got inside our heads which determines whether we're a man or a woman. So if you have a female gender identity, you're a woman. If you have male gender identity, you're a man. If you haven't got a gender identity, you may be gender neutral or something else. But the problem with this concept is it's not been something that's been discovered. It was something that psychiatrists invented. And when we try and define it, we define it in terms of circular reasoning. So a gender identity is the gender with which you identify. Yes. Or it's also rests on sexist stereotypes, because that's the only link that you've got to what this thing actually is. It's somebody who prefers to present in the other way. So I think this is one of the hardest questions which a lot of people struggle with, is because when people say, well, I identify as a woman, and the question comes about what does a woman mean? And then the response is a woman is someone who identifies as a woman. You see what Debbie's saying here is it becomes circular. Do you have any answers about that, Peter, what gender identity is? Well, of course, what constitutes a woman involves a lot of different factors. You know, genes and chromosomes, wombs, reproductive capacity, hormones. There's a whole constellation of factors, not any one single one. So there may be biological women who are born without some of those traditional female attributes. But I hope no one would therefore say they're not women. When it comes to gender identity, the feeling that a person is a trans woman is so strong, so powerful, that I think it must have some psychological, emotional, probably brain structure roots. I know the evidence is not clear on that, but there have been 2 or 3 studies around the world which suggest that the brain structures of trans women are different from those of other women. And that is why they so strongly believe,
or maybe the reason they so strongly believe that they are women.
Yeah.
And I think it would be very, very wrong to penalise them for something innate like that.
I mean, my view on that has always been we take the liberal approach, which is that anyone should be allowed to identify however they please, use whatever language about themselves, but that they mustn't force other people to use language that they don't want to use about them. And that to me, is a liberal approach. The problem, clearly, with matters such as women's sports is that you have a rights issue such as that hitting up against, potentially, another group's rights. And would you say that that might be the problem here? It's a collision of rights, I suppose.
Well, there is, and it's how we define a woman. You know, Peter's said there's different issues, but I would say it comes down to biological sex, and this is something in the vast majority of people, our sex is clear. There are intersex conditions, but diagnosable intersex conditions are assigned to one sex or another, so we can deal with that separately. Here's a transgender issue about can people who have all the attributes of being male, like me, I've fathered 3 children, so I am definitely male. If I suddenly decide that I identify as a woman, does that alone allow me to compete in women's sports? And I don't think it should.
There's something happening, though, I see often with activists saying that biological sex itself, to acknowledge this, is actually damaging or is actually hurtful in some way. But then, as Blair White pointed, Blair White is a trans writer from America saying, unless there is biological sex, there's no such thing as trans. So there's actually debates within the trans community about this. This isn't as settled as some of the more vocal activists seem to think. Do you think, Peter, or do you worry that because the debate has become quite toxic and that people are simply using different definitions or simply accusing others of hate or transphobia when maybe it's just a different view? Do you think that that is preventing us from making any progress here?
I think sometimes the allegation of hate is exaggerated or overused. What I want to see is a calm, polite, civil discussion between all of us. Mm-hmm. You know, I've been passionately in support of women's rights for over 50 years. I've supported every single women's rights campaign going in the last 5 decades. But I'm equally passionate about the rights of trans people as well. And I don't really see there's a conflict. To me, a biological woman and a trans woman, they have statistically the same kind of chance or probability. They'll be victims of prejudice, discrimination, harassment, domestic violence, hate crime, and even rape and sexual assault.
Yes.
So surely all women, including trans women, have a common interest in working together. You know, we may have differences and different points of view, but let's deal with them in a comradely, supportive way, and let's find a solution which protects both women's rights and trans rights.
So maybe it is about focusing on the common ground, actually, because, I mean, we can all agree that there are people out there who are hateful towards people because they are trans. There are people who are hateful towards people because they are women. And we can all agree that that's not acceptable. But what worries me is on either side, sometimes you hear the initial accusation is, this person must be a misogynist if they want people to be able to compete in sports on that footing. Or this person must be a transphobe. I mean, Stonewall repeatedly, to me, keeps saying, as far as I'm aware, keeps suggesting that people must be transphobic if they are critical of their views. That's not a good starting point, is it, Debbie?
No, it isn't, because we've got real issues here. We're looking at how to include people in sport. Let's put those things to one side about hate and transphobia, and let's have a look at this specific issue. I agree with Peter. The common ground which we can look at here is inclusion, including people, and trans people need to be included in sport. But with 3 males here, let's talk about men's sport, and let's look at men's sport, and how can men include trans women in men's sport so it keeps our dignity, and we feel safe in that environment. Why not that? And why are we pushing the problem onto women to pick up?
That is a good question, Peter. Why does this debate always focus around women's sport? Is that not in of itself an acknowledgement that there's more of a risk to women's sports and that there is essentially a physical advantage to male-bodied people? Is that not the case?
Well, I think trans athletes, women trans athletes, feel so passionate that they are women, they want to compete with other women. And they don't want to compete with other men because they don't identify as men or with men's sport. But, you know, maybe there are other solutions, but it has to be on the basis of fairness. It has to be on the basis that no one has a particular demonstrable, significant advantage. And if we have that sort of principle in mind, I think we can find a solution.
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. I would urge everyone to check out some of Debbie's articles on The Spectator. She writes beautifully about this topic. And also there's a documentary about Peter Tatchell on Netflix at the moment called Hayton, Peter Tatchell, which is a fantastic piece of work. And I really, really would... It's not a hit piece, by the way. It's actually a very interesting overview of his life and work. So do check that out as well.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.